The silence that fell over the Naval Base San Diego's main dining facility was absolute. One moment the cacophony of metal trays conversations and the low hum of industrial cooling systems filled the air. The next nothing. 300 personnel from freshly minted ensigns to weathered chief petty officers froze in mid-motion as the sharp crack of palm against cheek echoed through the cavernous room. Vice Admiral James Thornton, 6'2", with shoulders still broad at 62, loomed over Lieutenant Elena Rodriguez. A red mark bloomed on her olive cheek, stark against her otherwise composed expression. The Admiral's West Point ring had caught the light as it connected a flash of gold before impact. Rodriguez hadn't moved, hadn't flinched, hadn't raised a hand in defense. Her dark eyes remained fixed on Thornton's, calculating, assessing. For 5 endless seconds, no one breathed. Then, with mechanical precision, Rodriguez bent down and retrieved her fallen tablet, its screen now spiderwebbed with cracks radiating from the impact point. Without a word, she tucked the device under her arm and walked unhurried toward the exit. Her footsteps echoed in the silence, measured and even, until the double doors swung closed behind her. The entire dining facility remained frozen, caught in the gravity of what they just witnessed. A 2-star admiral had struck a junior officer in full view of half the base. What none of them knew, what even Admiral Thornton didn't know, was that he had just made the worst mistake of his 39-year naval career. And the timer on that mistake had already started counting down. 6 hours earlier, Lieutenant Elena Rodriguez had awakened at 0400, as she did every morning. Her quarters were Spartan, no photos, no decorations, just the necessities arranged with mathematical precision. At 34, she had spent nearly a third of her life in service to her country, though not in ways most would recognize or understand. She completed her morning routine with the same efficiency that characterized everything she did: 20 minutes of high-intensity exercise, a 5-minute shower, and a precisely measured breakfast of black coffee and steel-cut oats. By 04:55, she was dressed in her perfectly pressed uniform, dark hair pulled back into a regulation bun so tight it would have given most people a headache. Rodriguez was not most people. She placed her hand on the biometric scanner beside an unmarked door at the end of a nondescript hallway in the west wing of the base, a corridor most personnel didn't even know existed. The scanner pulsed green, followed by a retinal scan, then the heavy door slid open with a pneumatic hiss. "Morning, Ellie," called out Senior Chief Petty Officer Marcus Lawson without looking up from his console. At 58, Lawson was the oldest member of the unit, his salt and pepper beard a standing violation of Navy regulations that nobody dared challenge. "The Colonel's looking for you." Rodriguez nodded, continuing through the labyrinthine facility until she reached a reinforced door marked only with a simple black Phoenix emblem. She pressed her palm against another scanner and entered. Task Force Phoenix operated in shadows so deep that even most admirals weren't cleared to know it existed. Officially, it was a communications research unit. Unofficially, it was the Navy's most advanced electronic warfare development team, answering directly to the National Security Agency. Inside, Colonel Frank Mitchell sat at a desk cluttered with both paper files and holographic displays. At 67, Mitchell was technically retired, at least according to his public records. His weathered face had earned each of its creases during the Cold War, operating electronic surveillance posts along the east-west German border, intercepting Soviet communications when such activities were officially denied. He looked up when Rodriguez entered, his steel-gray eyes crinkling at the corners. "Morning, Lieutenant. Sleep well." 4 hours, 20 minutes, sir. Optimal." Mitchell shook his head, a faint smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "Still tracking it to the minute I see." He gestured to the chair across from him, which Rodriguez took, sitting with perfect posture. "We picked up something interesting at 0200, Mitchell said, sliding a data pad across the desk. "Signal pattern we haven't seen before. Chinese most likely, but using a frequency-hopping algorithm that's innovative." Rodriguez studied the waveform displayed on the pad, her eyes narrowing slightly. "It's not random. There's a pattern here." "Thought you'd say that. What are you seeing?" Her finger traced along the peaks and valleys of the signal representation. "It's using astronomical constants as encryption keys. The ratio between frequencies follows the orbital periods of Jupiter's moons." Mitchell leaned back, a proud gleam in his eye. "Took our computers 3 hours to determine that. Took you 15 seconds. Rodriguez didn't acknowledge the compliment. "The signal originated on base." "Bingo." Mitchell's expression hardened. "Someone here is transmitting to a Chinese intelligence asset offshore. We need to find them." "Parameters, sir. Passive surveillance only. If we spook them, they'll go dark and resurface somewhere else." Mitchell handed her another device, this one smaller, designed to look like a standard-issue Navy tablet. This has been modified with our newest spectrum analyzer. It can detect their transmissions within 50 meters, even through their encryption. Rodriguez accepted the device, already mentally plotting optimal surveillance locations across the base. One more thing, Mitchell added, his tone shifting. Vice Admiral Thornton is touring the base today with his staff. Rodriguez's expression didn't change, but something hardened in her eyes. Understood, sir. Elena. Mitchell rarely used her first name. When he did, it meant something personal was coming. I know your history with Thornton's command style. 3 years earlier, Rodriguez had been temporarily assigned to Thornton's previous command. Her recommendations about vulnerabilities in their electronic security had been publicly dismissed as technical paranoia from the computer people. 2 months later, a foreign intelligence service exploited exactly the weakness she had identified. Ancient history, sir. Mitchell studied her face. You know how I found you, right? MIT. Brilliant electrical engineering student with perfect test scores but no social life. No family after your parents died in that car crash your sophomore year. The Navy recruited you because you were smart, but I recruited you for Phoenix because you were patient. He leaned forward. In our business, patience isn't just a virtue, it's a weapon. The Russians taught me that in '86. We'd identified a KGB operative in West Berlin, but instead of arresting him immediately, we watched him for 8 months. When we finally moved, we didn't just get him, we got his entire network. Rodriguez nodded once. I remember the case study, sir. Do you remember what I call it? Spectral documentation, she replied. Recording everything until the evidence is overwhelming. Exactly. Mitchell's eyes held hers. If Thornton gives you trouble in knowing him, he will remember your training. Document everything. Wait for the right moment. Then, systematic correction, Rodriguez finished. The ghost of a smile touched her lips, there and gone in an instant. Mitchell nodded, satisfied. The system corrects itself when presented with irrefutable evidence. Be the collector of that evidence, not its enforcer. Rodriguez stood, tucking the specialized tablet under her arm. I'll find our signal leak, sir. I know you will. As she turned to leave, Mitchell added, and Elena, stay frosty around Thornton. Men like him, men from my generation who haven't adapted, they're dangerous because they don't understand what they don't understand. She paused at the door. With respect, sir, you're from his generation. Mitchell's weathered face cracked into a rare full smile. Difference is, I know what I don't know. That's why I recruited people like you. By 0930, Rodriguez had positioned herself in the main networking hub of the base, ostensibly performing routine maintenance while her modified tablet silently scanned for the mysterious signal. Nothing. She methodically moved through her checklist of probable transmission locations, the communications center, the administration building, the officers' quarters. Still nothing. At 12:45, she entered the dining facility, selecting a seat near the center of the room where her scanner could cover the maximum area. She placed her tray down, precisely arranged her utensils, and positioned her tablet against her water glass at the optimal viewing angle. As she took mechanical bites of her meal, her eyes remained fixed on the screen, watching the cascade of frequency data flow past. The dining facility at Naval Base San Diego, like all military eating establishments, had its unwritten rules and hierarchies. Junior enlisted personnel clustered near the entrance. Officers filled the middle section. Senior officers and command staff claimed the tables near the large windows overlooking the harbor. Rodriguez sat alone in the neutral zone between these territories, her focus entirely on her work. Then her scanner pinged softly. The signal had reappeared. Her fingers flew across the screen, narrowing the detection parameters. The transmission was close within the dining facility itself. Her eyes flicked up, briefly scanning the room while maintaining her neutral expression. The signal was using the same Jupiter-Moon encryption pattern, but it was stronger now, more urgent in its transmission tempo. Rodriguez zoomed in on the frequency pattern, beginning the process of triangulating its exact location in the room. She was so focused that she didn't notice the sudden hush falling over the dining facility, didn't register the approaching footsteps until a shadow fell across her table. Well, what do we have here? The voice was loud, deliberately projected to carry across the room. One of our technical specialists actually leaving her cave to eat with the real sailors. Vice Admiral James Thornton stood over her table, surrounded by a coterie of staff officers who laughed on cue at his remark. He was an imposing figure, career surface warfare officer with combat experience dating back to Desert Storm, where he'd earned the nickname the Sea Lion for his aggressive tactics against the Iraqi Navy. Rodriguez didn't look up. Her fingers continued tracing patterns on the screen, narrowing down the signal source. The transmission had just spiked in intensity. Whoever was sending it was transmitting a large data packet. "I'm speaking to you, Lieutenant," Thornton said, his voice hardening. Rodriguez's eyes flicked up briefly, then returned to her work. "Signal analysis in progress, sir. Time sensitive." Thornton's face flushed. "When a flag officer addresses you, you stand at attention. That's basic military courtesy." On her screen, Rodriguez could see the transmission source narrowing down. It was coming from somewhere near the senior officers section. 3 more seconds and she'd have it pinpointed. But the Admiral's broad hand came down, sweeping her tablet off the table. It clattered to the floor, the protective case preventing it from shattering completely. "These computer jockeys," Thornton announced to the room, "think they're above military protocol because they can type fast and speak gibberish." He leaned down, his voice dropping to a theatrical near whisper that nonetheless carried across the silent room. "Let me explain something, Lieutenant. Men like me who've actually seen combat are the reason you get to play with your little electronic toys in safety." Rodriguez looked up at him fully now, her dark eyes expressionless. She saw a man past his prime, desperately clinging to a world that was changing too fast around him. She saw the frustration in the tightness around his mouth, the insecurity behind the bluster. She saw with perfect clarity a man afraid of becoming obsolete. "My work is classified, Admiral," she said quietly. "Signal analysis for threat pattern T88B. "Threat pattern," Thornton scoffed. "You're probably watching cat videos on the government's dime." He straightened, adjusting his uniform jacket where his impressive rack of ribbons caught the light. "Your type hides behind screens because you're afraid of the real world." The dining facility had gone completely silent. Every eye was on them. Rodriguez remained seated, her gaze level, her breathing unchanged. This only seemed to infuriate Thornton further. "Stand up when I'm speaking to you, Lieutenant. That's an order." "With respect, sir, I need to retrieve my device. The analysis is time sensitive." Something snapped in Thornton's expression. Later witnesses would disagree about what exactly crossed his face in that moment. Rage, certainly, but also something deeper, more primal. The fear of irrelevance, perhaps, or the desperation of a man who senses the ground shifting beneath his feet. His hand came up in a flash, not a closed fist, which might have felt too obviously criminal, but an open-handed strike that connected with Rodriguez's cheek with a sharp crack. The impact turned her head slightly, leaving a rapidly reddening mark where his ring had caught her skin. The collective intake of breath from 300 witnesses seemed to suck all the oxygen from the room. Rodriguez slowly turned back to face him, her expression unchanged. She blinked once deliberately, her internal training documenting every detail, the angle of the strike. The witnesses present the exact time on the wall clock, the way Thornton's class ring had caught the light before impact. For 5 seconds, no one moved. Then with deliberate calm, Rodriguez bent down and retrieved her tablet from the floor. The screen was cracked, but the device was still functioning. She tucked it under her arm, stood, and placed her tray on the return rack. Without a word or backward glance, she walked out of the dining facility, her pace measured, unhurried. She did not touch her cheek where the mark was darkening. She did not look at any of the shocked faces watching her exit. Behind her, she heard Thornton's voice rising again, attempting to regain control of the situation. "Let that be a lesson in proper military bearing," he declared, though his voice carried a new uncertain edge. Rodriguez walked directly to the secured wing that housed Task Force Phoenix. She did not deviate to the medical facility. She did not go to the legal office to file a complaint. She went straight to Colonel Mitchell's office. Mitchell looked up as she entered, his eyes immediately fixing on the mark on her cheek. He stood slowly, his weathered hands flattening on his desk. "Thornton," he asked, his voice deceptively calm. Rodriguez nodded once. "The signal source was in the dining facility. I was triangulating its position when the Admiral interrupted. The transmission spiked just before he approached my position." Mitchell's eyes narrowed. "You think there's a connection?" "Unknown, but the timing is suspicious." She placed the damaged tablet on his desk. "The device recorded everything. I need to extract the data before it corrupts." Mitchell nodded, pressing a button on his desk. "Lawson, get in here. Bring the backup system." While they waited, Mitchell studied Rodriguez's face. "Are you all right?" "Operational capacity unaffected, sir." A ghost of a smile touched Mitchell's lips. "That's not what I asked Elena." For the first time, something human flickered in her eyes. "I've experienced worse, sir." "I know. That's not an answer either." Senior Chief Lawson entered carrying a specialized device. He froze momentarily when he saw Rodriguez's face, then continued forward. placing the equipment on the desk. Jesus Christ, he muttered. Thornton did that. Open-handed strike with right hand West Point ring made contact, Rodriguez confirmed clinically. Approximately 37 minutes ago in the main dining facility, 293 witnesses by my count. Lawson shook his head as he connected Rodriguez's damaged tablet to his equipment. Cold as ice, LT. If someone laid hands on me like that, I'd be in the brig for what I'd do to them. Which is precisely why you're not in electronic surveillance, Marcus, Mitchell said dryly. Patience and documentation. Got it, Lawson announced as the data transfer completed. Signal recording visual and audio from the tablet's sensors, plus the built-in body cam in the lieutenant's glasses. All intact. Mitchell turned to one of his secure screens. Show me. The footage was crystal clear. Multiple angles showing Thornton's approach. His increasing agitation, the tablet being swept to the floor, and finally the unmistakable strike to Rodriguez's face. The audio captured every word. Perfect chain of evidence, Mitchell said quietly. Legally unassailable. Sir, Rodriguez interrupted, the signal is more important than the assault. Someone was transmitting classified data precisely when Thornton created his distraction. Mitchell's eyebrows rose. You think Thornton is connected to Chinese intelligence? Unlikely, sir. His psychological profile suggests he's too patriotic for espionage. More probable, someone used his well-known dislike of technical personnel to create a diversion. When he approached my table, the signal strength increased by 300%. Lawson whistled low. So while everyone was watching Thornton make an ass of himself, someone was transmitting right under our noses. Exactly, Rodriguez confirmed. The transmission source was somewhere in the senior officers section of the dining facility. I almost had it pinpointed when the Admiral intervened. Mitchell considered this, his expression hardening. So we have two problems. A flag officer who physically assaulted one of my officers and a Chinese intelligence asset on base who's somehow connected to Thornton's inner circle. Permission to continue signal tracking, sir, Rodriguez requested. The perpetrator will transmit again. Granted, Mitchell said, but first, he reached into his desk drawer and removed an unmarked case from which he extracted a new tablet, identical to her damaged one but intact. Upgraded model, better range, and this one's recording everything continuously to our secure servers. Rodriguez accepted the device with a nod. Thank you, sir. What about Thornton? Lawson asked. We letting that slide? Nothing slides? Mitchell said, his voice taking on the hard edge that had made him legendary in Cold War intelligence circles. But timing is everything. Thornton's been selected to lead the Blue Force in Exercise Trident next month. Rodriguez looked up sharply. The Carrier Group Electronic Warfare Readiness Test. Mitchell nodded, a predatory gleam in his eyes. The very same. The most sophisticated naval electronic warfare exercise we've conducted since the Cold War ended. He turned to Rodriguez. And guess who's just been appointed to lead the Red Team opposition force? Understanding dawned in Rodriguez's eyes. Optimal timing for systematic correction. Precisely. Mitchell's smile didn't reach his eyes. Thornton's a dinosaur and he just picked a fight with a meteor. But for now, we focus on finding our Chinese friends, one problem at a time. As Rodriguez turned to leave, Mitchell called after her. And Elena, ice that cheek. It'll help with the swelling. She paused at the door. Will that affect documentation? Mitchell chuckled, shaking his head. Always the professional. No, the evidence is already secured. Take care of yourself now. As the door closed behind her, Mitchell's expression darkened. He turned to Lawson. I want everything on Thornton, not just his service record. I want financial records, phone logs, email metadata, everything. And put our best people on monitoring his staff. One of them is working with foreign intelligence. You got it, Colonel. Lawson hesitated. You know, I served with Thornton back in Desert Storm. He was a different man than a good officer respected his people. Mitchell nodded slowly. The world changed, Marcus. Some of us changed with it. Some of us didn't. He looked down at the frozen image of Thornton's face contorted with rage. And some of us are about to learn the hard way that the old rules don't apply anymore. 2 days later, Vice Admiral James Thornton sat in his spacious office overlooking the harbor. The morning sun glinted off the water, illuminating the sleek destroyers and cruisers of the Pacific Fleet. From his window, he could see the USS Abraham Lincoln aircraft carrier dominating the horizon, a fitting symbol of American naval power. Traditional power. Thornton sipped his coffee, reviewing the preliminary plans for Exercise Trident. As Blue Force commander, he would be leading a full carrier strike group against a simulated enemy force. It was the kind of assignment he lived for: real ships, real sailors, real warfare scenarios. A knock at his door interrupted his thoughts. "Enter," he called. His aide commander Robert Hayes stepped in crisply. At 42, Hayes was the model of a modern naval officer, Annapolis graduate, surface warfare background, impeccable service record. "Sir, the final brief on Exercise Trident," Hayes said, placing a folder on Thornton's desk. "The Red Force opposition has been finalized." Thornton flipped open the folder, scanning the contents. "Task Force Phoenix, never heard of them. They're a specialized electronic warfare unit, sir. Technically part of naval intelligence, but with direct ties to the NSA. They specialize in signal intelligence and electronic countermeasures." Thornton scoffed. "Computer geeks playing war games. This should be interesting." He continued reading, then stopped abruptly. "Lieutenant Rodriguez is leading Red Force, the same Rodriguez from the incident in the mess hall." Hayes shifted uncomfortably. "Yes, sir. Apparently she's the top electronic warfare specialist in the Navy." "That woman was insubordinate and disrespectful," Thornton muttered. "And now she's supposed to challenge my carrier group." He closed the folder with a dismissive snap. "This is becoming a pattern, Hayes. The Pentagon pushing these technical specialists into combat roles where they don't belong." "Sir," Hayes said carefully, "the scuttlebutt is that Lieutenant Rodriguez is exceptional. Her file is heavily redacted, but there are rumors about her work in the Middle East. Something about shutting down an entire air defense network without firing a shot. Rumors and computer simulations," Thornton dismissed. "Real warfare is about ships, planes, and sailors making split-second decisions under fire, not algorithms and code." He stood walking to the window to stare out at the fleet. "These people think they can win wars from behind screens. They've never felt the deck rolling beneath their feet during combat operations." Hayes remained silent, knowing better than to contradict his admiral when he was in this mood. "What about our special project?" Thornton asked, changing the subject. "Any movement from Senator Blackwood?" "Yes, sir. The senator confirms that the Appropriations Committee is receptive to the reallocation proposal. If the carrier group performs well in Exercise Trident, he believes he can push through the funding shift from electronic warfare to traditional fleet expansion." Thornton nodded, satisfied. $12 billion for new destroyers instead of wasting it on more computers and technicians who've never seen combat. He turned back to Hayes. "Make sure the exercise parameters favor traditional warfare scenarios. I want clear metrics that show the superiority of conventional forces." "Already done, sir. The exercise will emphasize kinetic operations and minimize electronic warfare components." "Good." Thornton picked up the folder again, flipping to Rodriguez's personnel file. The photograph showed her serious expression, dark eyes revealing nothing. "Let's see how well Lieutenant Rodriguez performs when facing real warships instead of computer simulations." After Hayes departed, Thornton continued staring at Rodriguez's file. Something about the woman unsettled him, her calm in the face of his anger, her lack of visible reaction to the strike. Most junior officers would have been intimidated, would have shown fear or at least respect. She had shown nothing. It wasn't natural. The incident in the dining facility had already caused him some headaches. Several senior officers had expressed their disapproval privately, though none dared challenge him directly. The base commander had requested a clarification of the events, which Thornton had dismissed as a necessary disciplinary action against insubordination. So far, no formal complaint had been filed. That was unusual, but Thornton assumed Rodriguez had thought better of challenging a flag officer. Career suicide, especially for a woman in a technical role. He closed the file, dismissing the matter from his mind. In 4 weeks, Exercise Trident would demonstrate the continued primacy of traditional naval warfare. Senator Blackwood would secure the funding reallocation, and Lieutenant Elena Rodriguez would learn her place in the proper order of things. As Thornton turned back to the window, he couldn't have known that 22 miles away, in a secured facility buried within a nondescript building, Colonel Frank Mitchell was reviewing the final plans for Red Team's strategy in Exercise Trident. Beside him stood Lieutenant Rodriguez, her expression revealing nothing as they methodically identified and exploited every vulnerability in Thornton's carrier strike group. The mark on her cheek had faded, but the memory, like the video evidence securely archived on 3 separate servers, remained pristine. In the electronic battlefield of the 21st century, patience was indeed a weapon, and Lieutenant Elena Rodriguez had been trained to wait for the perfect moment to strike. That moment was now precisely 29 days away. The USS Vigilance cut through the Pacific waves like a blade, its massive hull displacing thousands of tons of water with quiet authority. On the flag bridge, Vice Admiral James Thornton stood with his hands clasped behind his back, watching the horizon where two R. Lee Burke-class destroyers sailed in perfect formation. His carrier strike group was assembling for Exercise Trident, the most complex naval warfare simulation conducted since the Cold War. Thornton felt the familiar surge of pride as he surveyed the assembled firepower. This was real warfare steel on water sailors at battle stations, the coordinated movement of vessels that could project American military might anywhere on Earth. The exercise would begin in earnest tomorrow, and he was determined to demonstrate the continued supremacy of traditional naval forces. Admiral, final briefing in 10 minutes, Commander Hayes announced, appearing at Thornton's side. Thornton nodded without turning. Status of the Blue Force. All assets in position, sir. Carrier Air Wing fully operational Aegis systems online across all platforms, submarine screen deployed. And what about our opponents? Thornton couldn't keep the dismissive tone from his voice. Hayes hesitated. Task Force Phoenix has been allocated a small command vessel and minimal support assets. As you requested, the exercise parameters heavily favor conventional warfare. Thornton smiled thinly. Good. Let's see how Lieutenant Rodriguez fares against real warships instead of computer simulations. The briefing room was filled with senior officers when Thornton entered. The blue glow of tactical displays illuminated determined faces as they reviewed battle plans. These were Thornton's People surface warfare officers who had risen through the ranks commanding ships, not technicians who had never felt salt spray on their faces. Gentlemen, Thornton began taking his position at the head of the table. Exercise Trident represents more than just training. It represents a philosophical question about the future of naval warfare. He gestured to the holographic display of the Carrier Strike Group. For 200 years, American naval power has been defined by ships' aircraft and the sailors who operate them. Recently, there's been a push toward over-reliance on electronic systems and cyber capabilities. He paused, making eye contact with key officers. Tomorrow, we will demonstrate conclusively that traditional naval forces remain the backbone of American sea power. Our opponent is Task Force Phoenix, a small electronic warfare unit that believes it can challenge a full carrier strike group with computers and algorithms. A ripple of derisive chuckles spread through the room. We will use this exercise to secure the future funding of actual warfighting capabilities, not theoretical cyber warfare that has never been proven in actual combat. Sir, interjected Captain Daniel Morrison, the Carrier Air Wing commander, what specifically can we expect from Red Force? According to intelligence, they'll attempt electronic countermeasures, communications disruption, and sensor degradation. Hayes answered, classic electronic warfare tactics, but nothing our systems can't handle. Our Aegis combat systems have multiple redundancies and hardened circuits, added Captain Jennifer Watson, commander of the cruiser USS Gettysburg. Even if they manage to affect one layer, we have backups. Thornton nodded approvingly. Exactly, and remember, in real combat, we can always resort to visual identification and analog systems. No amount of hacking can stop a 5-inch shell or a harpoon missile. As the briefing concluded, Thornton felt a surge of confidence. Tomorrow would vindicate his vision of naval warfare and put Lieutenant Rodriguez firmly in her place. 73 miles away in a converted fishing trawler anchored in international waters, Lieutenant Elena Rodriguez sat cross-legged on the deck, surrounded by an array of customized equipment. The vessel, officially designated USNS Shadow Basin, looked unremarkable from the outside. Inside it housed some of the most sophisticated electronic warfare systems ever developed. Thermal imaging shows they've got the full strike group assembled, reported Senior Chief Lawson, handing Rodriguez a tablet displaying infrared satellite imagery. Carrier 2 cruisers, 4 destroyers, and support vessels, plus submarines we can't see. Rodriguez nodded, eyes fixed on her equipment. They've activated their Aegis systems. I can see the radar emissions. From the cabin doorway, Colonel Mitchell watched his protege work. They're expecting traditional electronic countermeasures, he said, jamming false signals, maybe some network penetration. That's what makes this interesting, Rodriguez replied without looking up. She made a minute adjustment to one of her devices. They're expecting me to attack their systems directly. But you won't, Mitchell stated. It wasn't a question. Rodriguez finally looked up, the ghost of a smile flickering across her face. Why break into a house when you can convince the occupants to open the door and invite you in? Mitchell smiled. This was why he had recruited Rodriguez all those years ago. While other electronic warfare specialists tried to overpower enemy systems, Rodriguez understood something more fundamental. Modern naval combat systems weren't just technological, They were psychological. They were operated by humans who trusted their equipment implicitly. "How's the weather forecast?" Mitchell asked. "Clear skies, light seas," Lawson replied. "Perfect conditions for naval operations." "Perfect for them," Rodriguez corrected, "not for us. I'd prefer fog or rain, anything to degrade visual confirmation capabilities." "They're already degraded," Mitchell said confidently. "Not by weather, but by overconfidence. Thornton believes in what he can see and touch. He trusts his radar, his sonar, his communications because they're tangible to him. That's his weakness." Rodriguez nodded, returning to her equipment. "I've analyzed Thornton's combat history. In Desert Storm, he relied heavily on Aegis target identification. In subsequent exercises, he's shown consistent preference for sensor data over human intelligence." "And what about the mole?" Lawson asked. "Any progress tracking our intelligence leak?" "Commander Hayes remains the primary suspect," Rodriguez replied. "His communications pattern is consistent with the Jupiter moon encryption we detected. He's been careful, but patterns are inevitable." Mitchell frowned. "We need proof before we can move against him. Hayes is deeply embedded in Thornton's inner circle. If we're wrong, we lose credibility." "I've designed a trap," Rodriguez said, pulling up a complex signal diagram on her main screen. "During the exercise, I'll create a specific vulnerability in our communications. If Hayes is the mole, he'll recognize it and attempt to exploit it. When he does, we'll have definitive proof." "Killing two birds with one stone." Mitchell nodded approvingly. "Defeat Thornton and expose Hayes simultaneously." Rodriguez turned back to her equipment, making final adjustments. "I need 4 more hours to complete preparations." As Mitchell and Lawson left her to work, Mitchell paused at the door. "Elena, remember, this isn't just about Thornton or even Hayes. Senator Blackwood is pushing to redirect $12 billion from electronic warfare development to traditional surface combatants. If we fail tomorrow—" "We won't fail," Rodriguez stated with quiet certainty. She didn't look up from her work, but her voice carried absolute conviction. Mitchell studied her for a moment, then nodded and closed the door. Alone with her equipment, Rodriguez's fingers moved with practiced precision across keyboards and control interfaces. On her screens, the electromagnetic signatures of Thornton's strike group glowed like beacons. Every radar emission, every radio transmission, every electronic whisper from the assembled warships was being cataloged, analyzed, and understood. They were visible to her in ways Thornton couldn't imagine, not just their positions, but their operational patterns, their command protocols, their decision loops. For 8 hours, she had been passive, merely listening as the strike group conducted pre-exercise drills. Now she began to build her strategy layer by layer, like a composer creating a symphony of electronic deception. The exercise would begin at dawn. Thornton expected her to attack his systems directly, the traditional electronic warfare approach. Instead, she would do something far more subtle. She would turn his greatest strength, his sophisticated sensor network, into his greatest vulnerability. Dawn broke over the Pacific with spectacular clarity. The sky transitioned from deep indigo to burning orange as the first rays of sunlight glinted off the superstructures of the assembled warships. On the flag bridge of the USS Vigilance, Admiral Thornton watched the sunrise with satisfaction. Perfect conditions for naval operations, unlimited visibility, calm seas, light winds. "Exercise Trident will commence in 30 minutes, Admiral." Hayes reported, joining him at the forward windows. "All Blue Force elements report ready status." "And Red Force?" Thornton asked. "They've acknowledged commencement protocols. Their vessel is positioned at the eastern boundary of the exercise area." Thornton nodded. "Make sure our observers are prepared to document everything. I want comprehensive metrics showing the effectiveness of our conventional capabilities." "Yes, sir." Admiral Winters and the congressional delegation are settled in the observation room. Live feeds from all major systems will be displayed there. This added significance to the exercise. Admiral Catherine Winters, the Navy's Director of Operational Testing and Evaluation, would be evaluating the results personally. The congressional observers represented the Appropriations Committee, the same committee Senator Blackwood was lobbying for his funding reallocation. "Very good. Sound general quarters. Let's give our observers a proper show of naval power." Throughout the massive carrier alarm, klaxons blared. Sailors ran to battle stations, hatches were secured, and weapon systems were brought to exercise-ready status. The same scene played out across every vessel in the strike group, over 7,000 personnel, moving with practiced efficiency to prepare their ships for simulated combat. In the carrier's Combat Direction Center, the heart of the strike group's command and control capability, dozens of specialists manned radar consoles, communication systems, and tactical displays. The room hummed with the quiet confidence of the world's most advanced naval force. All systems report optimal functionality, the tactical action officer announced. Aegis arrays active Link 16 data networks synchronized across all platforms. Electronic countermeasure systems at full readiness. Thornton smiled. The combined electronic capabilities of his strike group represented billions of dollars of investment and decades of technological development. Each ship possessed multiple radar systems, secure communications, and sophisticated electronic protection measures. What could a single converted trawler possibly do against such overwhelming technological superiority? Exercise Trident commences in 5 minutes, Hayes announced. Red Force has acknowledged final warning. Very well, Thornton replied. Begin standard search patterns. Let's find them quickly and end this demonstration early. Aboard the USNS Shadow Basin, Lieutenant Rodriguez sat motionless before her array of specialized equipment. Her eyes were closed, her breathing slow and measured. 30 seconds to commencement, Lawson said quietly. Mitchell watched from the doorway, recognizing the pre-operation meditation routine he had taught her years ago. Rodriguez was centering herself, clearing away all distractions, focusing her mind like a laser. Her eyes opened, initiating phase 1. Her fingers moved across her console with surgical precision. On her screens, the electronic signatures of the strike group's radar systems bloomed like digital flowers, each ship's emissions distinct and identifiable. They're running standard search patterns, she noted. Aegis in full spectrum mode, E-2 Hawkeye airborne, early warning active submarine sonars and active ping. Exactly as expected, Mitchell confirmed. They're looking for a conventional naval target. Rodriguez nodded. Initiating Ghost Echo protocol. For the first 20 minutes, Rodriguez did nothing that the strike group would recognize as electronic warfare. She didn't jam their radars, didn't flood their communications with interference, didn't attempt to penetrate their networks. Instead, she listened and waited. On the vigilance, Thornton grew increasingly impatient. Status report, he demanded. Why haven't we located Red Force yet? No contacts, Admiral, reported the tactical action officer, confusion evident in his voice. Search patterns have covered 70% of the exercise area. Radar, sonar, and aerial surveillance all report negative contact. They must be employing some form of stealth technology, Thornton muttered. Expand the search perimeter. Launch additional aircraft. In the observation room, Admiral Winters leaned forward with interest. Unusual opening gambit, she commented to her aide. No electronic emissions from Red Force at all. Aboard the Shadow Basin, Rodriguez monitored the strike group's increasing activity with clinical detachment. They're launching additional aircraft, she noted, E-2 Hawkeye plus 4 FA-18s in search configuration. Time for phase 2, Mitchell asked. Rodriguez nodded. They're fully committed to their search pattern now. All their systems are looking outward, expecting an external threat. Her fingers danced across her keyboard, initiating signal reflection protocol. Deep within the HS combat system of the USS Gettysburg, a subtle anomaly appeared. It wasn't an error exactly, just a minor discrepancy in the radar return from a particular sector. Under normal circumstances, the system would automatically filter it as C clutter. But Rodriguez wasn't attacking the system. She was communicating with it in its own language, exploiting the adaptive algorithms designed to enhance its effectiveness. Gradually, almost imperceptibly, the Aegis system began to learn that certain radar returns deserve special attention. The system wasn't being hacked, it was being educated. Sir, reported the Gettysburg's combat systems officer to Captain Watson. We're getting intermittent returns from grid sector 7. Very faint, possibly a small surface vessel. Watson nodded. Maintain tracking, alert the Admiral. On the vigilance, Thornton received the report with satisfaction. Finally, direct the closest destroyer to investigate. Maintain aerial surveillance. Aye, sir. USS Mason is altering course to investigate. For the next 40 minutes, the strike group focused its attention on the mysterious radar returns in Sector 7. The USS Mason closed to within 15 nautical miles, its own sensors locked on the suspected location of Red Force. Aboard the Shadow Basin, Rodriguez watched the destroyer's approach on her monitors. Phase 2 complete, she announced. They've committed a major surface combatant to our Phantom. And meanwhile, Mitchell prompted, I've mapped every communication protocol, radar frequency, and sensor modulation pattern in their entire network. Rodriguez allowed herself a small smile. They've been transmitting their complete electronic order of battle, thinking they were searching for us. Time for phase 3. Rodriguez nodded. The Aegis system on the Gettysburg has now registered 17 learning events, adapting to our Phantom returns. Its adaptive algorithms are primed. She typed a series of commands, initiating signal inversion protocol. The true elegance of Rodriguez's strategy now revealed itself. Instead of jamming the strike group's sensors, which would have immediately alerted them to electronic attack, she began to subtly alter their perception of reality. The phantom returns in Sector 7 suddenly resolved into a clear radar signature, a small fishing vessel exactly matching the profile of the shadow basin. Simultaneously, Rodriguez activated a series of passive reflectors dropped by submarine days earlier, creating a convincing electronic ghost. Contact confirmed, reported the Mason's tactical officer. Small surface vessel, approximately 200 tons, matching Red Force profile. On the Vigilance, Thornton nodded in satisfaction. Maintain surveillance. Prepare for simulated engagement sequence. In the observation room, Admiral Winters frowned. That was too easy, she murmured. Her instincts were correct. While the strike group focused on the phantom target, Rodriguez executed the core of her strategy. Using the communication protocols she had mapped, she began inserting minute corruptions into the Link 16 tactical data network that connected all strike group elements. These weren't obvious errors that would trigger alerts. They were subtle discrepancies, slight variations in reported positions, minor timing inconsistencies in data, updates, small calibration shifts in sensor returns. Each individually was insignificant, but collectively they began to create a fractured picture of the battle space. Mason reports Red Force vessel appears to be dead in the water, Hayes informed Thornton. No emissions, no movement. Thornton frowned. That makes no sense. They wouldn't just sit there waiting to be found. He considered for a moment. It could be a decoy, maintain surveillance but continue searching other sectors. It was exactly the response Rodriguez had anticipated. They're questioning their initial contact, she reported to Mitchell. Now they'll broaden their search, which means more ships transmitting more data through the network. More opportunities for your corruptions to spread. Mitchell nodded approvingly. Exactly. The Aegis system's adaptive algorithms are designed to resolve discrepancies by adjusting sensitivity and correlation parameters. I'm not fighting those algorithms, I'm feeding them. The next 2 hours passed with mounting frustration for Blue Force. Additional phantom contacts appeared and disappeared. Radar returns became inconsistent. Communications occasionally experienced unexplained millisecond delays. None of these issues was significant enough to trigger system alarms, but collectively they created a growing sense of uncertainty. I don't understand it, Thornton growled, staring at the tactical display where potential Red Force contacts appeared and vanished like ghosts. Why can't we get a consistent fix on them? Sir Hayes suggested carefully. They may be employing some form of advanced electronic deception. Thornton's expression hardened. You mean they're hacking our systems? Not exactly, sir. Our cybersecurity protocols show no evidence of intrusion. It's more like they're confusing our sensors somehow. That's impossible. The Aegis system has multiple verification protocols and human oversight. Hayes hesitated. Lieutenant Rodriguez has a reputation for unconventional approaches to electronic warfare. Thornton dismissed this with a wave. Find them. I want this exercise concluded with a decisive Blue Force victory. In the observation room, Admiral Winters watched the growing confusion with professional interest. Unlike Thornton, she recognized what was happening. The Red Force wasn't attacking Blue Force systems directly, they were exploiting the fundamental architecture of those systems. It was brilliant. Note the time delays between sensor contact and tactical display updates, she murmured to her aide. They're increasing progressively. Someone is tampering with the system's internal clock. Aboard the Shadow Basin, Rodriguez monitored the growing cascade of effects spreading through the strike group's networks. Phase 3 complete, she announced. Their tactical picture is now sufficiently fragmented. They're experiencing sensor uncertainty across all platforms. Mitchell nodded. Time for the killstroke. Not yet. Rodriguez pulled up a separate monitoring screen. I'm still tracking Commander Hayes' communications. He's been repeatedly checking a specific encryption subroutine in the Aegis framework, exactly where I planted our trap. He's recognized the vulnerability you created. Yes, but he hasn't exploited it yet. He's being cautious. Rodriguez checked her watch. 2 more hours until optimal conditions. For the trap or for defeating Thornton, Mitchell asked. Both. Rodriguez allowed herself a rare smile. Timing is everything. On the Vigilance, Thornton's frustration was reaching a breaking point. For 4 hours, his strike group had been chasing electronic phantoms. Every time they thought they had located Red Force, the contact would fade or multiply or shift position impossibly fast. "This is ridiculous," he snapped. "We have the most sophisticated sensor network ever deployed at sea. How can we not locate one small vessel?" No one had a satisfactory answer. The tactical picture continued to degrade subtly. Radar returns became increasingly ambiguous. Sonar contacts multiplied with phantom echoes. Even visual identification from aircraft became unreliable as Rodriguez manipulated their targeting systems to create false positive identifications of wave patterns. Sir Hayes suggested, "Perhaps we should consider switching to backup systems and manual coordination procedures." It was exactly what Rodriguez had been waiting for. The suggestion implied an admission that their primary electronic systems could not be trusted, precisely the conclusion she had been methodically leading them toward for hours. "Absolutely not," Thornton declared. "That would be admitting defeat. Our systems are superior. We just need to use them more effectively." He turned to the communications officer. "Direct all ships to synchronize their Aegis systems to the Vigilance's master control. We'll create a single unified sensor picture instead of relying on distributed processing." It was a textbook response from a traditional commander when facing uncertainty, centralized control. It was also exactly what Rodriguez had predicted he would do. "Synchronization order transmitted, sir," the communications officer confirmed. "All Aegis platforms acknowledging." In that moment, as all ships in the strike group connected their combat systems directly to the Vigilance's master control, Rodriguez executed her masterstroke. The corruption she had been seeding throughout the network for hours suddenly propagated exponentially as the systems attempted to resolve discrepancies between their individual tactical pictures. The result was catastrophic. The unified tactical display that was supposed to create clarity instead erupted into chaos. Hundreds of phantom contacts bloomed across the screen, aircraft missiles, submarines, and surface vessels, appearing simultaneously from multiple vectors. "Multiple contacts," shouted the tactical action officer. "Sir, we're showing incoming missiles from bearing 045, 120, and 270. Aircraft approaching from Waite submarine contact directly beneath us." The combat direction center erupted into controlled chaos as officers attempted to make sense of the suddenly overwhelming tactical picture. "Verify those contacts," Thornton ordered. "Get visual confirmation." "Unable to verify, sir," responded the air operations officer. "Our aircraft are reporting clear skies, but their targeting systems are showing the same contacts." This was the genius of Rodriguez's approach. She hadn't created false contacts that could be disproven by visual observation. She had created an environment where the strike group's own systems were generating false positives that their verification protocols couldn't resolve. In the observation room, Admiral Winters sat back impressed. "Cognitive warfare," she murmured. "They've created an irreconcilable conflict between what the systems report and what human observers can verify." Aboard the Shadow Basin, Rodriguez monitored the cascade of confusion spreading through the strike group. "They've centralized their Aegis control as predicted," she reported. "Phantom contact proliferation successful." "And Hayes?" Mitchell asked. Rodriguez checked her monitoring screen. "He's accessing the planted vulnerability now. The increased system stress has forced his hand." Her fingers flew across her keyboard, capturing his transmission signature, backtracing through multiple relays. "Confirmed. He's transmitting tactical data to an external server using our Jupiter Moon encryption." Mitchell's eyes hardened. "We've got him." "Not just him," Rodriguez replied, pulling up a new screen. "I've traced the recipient. It's not going directly to a foreign intelligence service. It's being routed through Senator Blackwood's office first." Mitchell's eyebrows shot up. "Blackwood is involved with foreign intelligence." "It appears so. The data is being transmitted from his office to an unidentified server in the South China Sea." Rodriguez looked up from her screens. "This is bigger than Hayes. This is a coordinated operation involving Thornton, Hayes, and Blackwood." Mitchell processed this revelation. "Thornton may not know he's being used. Blackwood could be manipulating him through the funding proposal." "Agreed. Thornton's psychological profile suggests he wouldn't knowingly commit treason. He's likely an unwitting participant." Rodriguez turned back to her main console. "I've secured all evidence of Hayes' activities. Time to conclude the exercise." On the Vigilance, Thornton was fighting a losing battle against tactical uncertainty. The phantom contacts continued to multiply and move in physically impossible patterns. The strike group's carefully coordinated defense had dissolved into confusion. "This has to be some kind of hack," Thornton insisted. "There's no other explanation." At that moment, every screen in the Combat Direction Center simultaneously went blank. Then a single message appeared. Exercise Trident terminated. Red Force victory declared. All Blue Force vessels neutralized. Seconds later, Admiral Winters' voice came over the command circuit. Admiral Thornton, this is Admiral Winters. The exercise is concluded. Red Force has achieved complete electronic dominance, resulting in the simulated destruction of all Blue Force elements. Please stand down and prepare for immediate debrief. The silence in the Combat Direction Center was absolute. Officers stared at their now functioning screens in disbelief. There had been no electronic attack they could identify, no jamming, no obvious intrusion. Yet their entire strike group had been rendered combat ineffective without a single shot being fired. Thornton stood rigid, his face flushed with anger and humiliation. How he demanded of no one in particular. How did they do it? No one had an answer. The systems were already returning to normal operation, showing no evidence of the chaos that had engulfed them minutes earlier. Sir, Hayes said quietly, we should prepare for the debrief. Thornton nodded stiffly, his mind racing. This was worse than defeat. It was incomprehensible defeat. His career, his funding initiative, his entire philosophy of naval warfare had just been systematically dismantled, and he couldn't even explain how it had happened. As he made his way to the briefing room, a cold realization settled in his gut. This hadn't just been an exercise. It had been a reckoning, and Lieutenant Elena Rodriguez had been its architect. The most unsettling part was knowing that the mark he had left on her cheek 4 weeks ago had faded completely, but the lesson she had just taught him would leave a scar that would never heal. The briefing room aboard the USS Vigilance had never felt so silent. 20 senior officers sat rigidly at attention, their faces masks of professional composure betrayed only by the occasional clenched jaw or tightened grip on a coffee cup. At the head of the long table, the Admiral Catherine Winters studied the assembled leadership of what had been until 3 hours ago the most formidable naval strike group in the Pacific. Vice Admiral James Thornton sat at her right, his weathered face carefully neutral, though the muscle pulsing at his temple betrayed the storm beneath the surface. To her left sat Lieutenant Elena Rodriguez, her posture perfect, her dark eyes revealing nothing as she waited for the debriefing to begin. The contrast between them was stark. Thornton, with his chest full of ribbons, earned over 4 decades of service. Rodriguez, with her simple uniform, and the faint, almost imperceptible remnant of a mark on her cheek where Thornton's ring had struck her a month earlier. Gentlemen, lady, Admiral Winters began, her voice measured and clinical. What we witnessed today will fundamentally change naval warfare doctrine for the next generation. She activated the room's main display, showing a time-lapsed representation of the exercise. In 4 hours and 17 minutes, a single officer with limited hardware assets achieved complete electronic dominance over an entire carrier strike group, rendering all combat capabilities effectively neutralized. The display showed the progressive deterioration of Blue Force's tactical picture, the gradual corruption of sensor data, the multiplication of phantom contacts, and finally the complete systemic collapse. Lieutenant Rodriguez, Winters continued, please explain to this assembly exactly what you did. Rodriguez stood her movements economical and precise. She tapped a control, taking command of the display. My strategy exploited 3 fundamental vulnerabilities in modern naval combat systems. She began, her voice clear and dispassionate. First, the inherent trust operators place in sensor data. Second, the self-correcting algorithms that they see designed to resolve data conflicts. Third, the predictable human response to uncertainty. The display shifted to show the Aegis combat system architecture. I did not hack your systems, Rodriguez continued. Hacking implies forcing entry through security barriers. Instead, I spoke to your systems in their own language, exploiting the very features designed to make them effective. She explained how she had seeded subtle corruptions throughout the tactical network, creating minor discrepancies that the adaptive algorithms attempted to resolve by adjusting sensitivity parameters. As these adjustments cascaded through interconnected systems, they created a progressively distorted picture of reality. The masterstroke, Admiral Winters interjected, was predicting that Admiral Thornton would respond to uncertainty by centralizing control, connecting all ships' combat systems directly to the Vigilance's masternode. Rodriguez nodded. When that occurred, the corruption spread exponentially, creating the systemic collapse we observed. Throughout the briefing room, expressions shifted from confusion to dawning comprehension as the elegant simplicity of Rodriguez's strategy became clear. She hadn't overwhelmed their systems with brute force, she had turned their own technological sophistication against them. Questions, Admiral Winters asked. Captain Morrison, the Air Wing commander, raised his hand. Lieutenant, could this vulnerability be exploited in actual combat? Yes, Rodriguez replied without hesitation. In fact, there is evidence suggesting foreign intelligence services are already developing similar capabilities. This statement sent a ripple of discomfort through the room. It was one thing to lose an exercise, quite another to learn their entire approach to naval warfare might be fundamentally vulnerable. How do we counter this threat? Asked Captain Watson of the Gettysburg. That's precisely why Exercise Trident was so important, Admiral Winters answered. It demonstrates that our current over-reliance on integrated electronic systems creates strategic vulnerabilities. We need a balanced approach, maintaining our technological edge while developing analog fallbacks and human judgment filters. Thornton had remained silent throughout the debriefing, his expression growing increasingly troubled. Finally, he spoke. Admiral Winters, Lieutenant Rodriguez, he said, his voice rigidly controlled. I acknowledge the effectiveness of Red Force's strategy, but this was a controlled exercise with artificial constraints. In actual combat, multiple factors would mitigate these vulnerabilities. Rodriguez met his gaze directly, such as physical distance for one. Your vessel was within the exercise perimeter. In real combat, you'd never get close enough to affect our systems so comprehensively. False, Rodriguez replied, not confrontationally, but with absolute certainty. The same effect could be achieved from over the horizon using autonomous drones as relay points. The physics of electromagnetic propagation make proximity irrelevant if the attack vector is properly designed. Before Thornton could respond, the briefing room door opened. A naval intelligence officer entered and approached Admiral Winters, whispering something in her ear. Winters' expression hardened. Gentlemen, we need to adjourn temporarily, she announced. Security matter. All personnel, except Admiral Thornton, Lieutenant Rodriguez, and Commander Hayes, please clear the room. As the others filed out, confusion evident on their faces, Winters activated a security protocol on her tablet. The room's windows opaqued instantly, and a faint hum indicated electronic countermeasures had been activated, preventing any surveillance. Commander Hayes, Winters said, her voice now cold steel, please surrender your sidearm to the MP at the door. Hayes blinked in confusion. Ma'am. Now, Commander. Hayes slowly removed his service pistol, handing it to the stone-faced military policeman who had appeared at the doorway. Robert, what is this about? Thornton demanded, rising to his feet. Admiral Thornton, please remain seated, Winters ordered. When he hesitated, she added, That's a direct order, James. Thornton slowly sat back down, his expression now genuinely concerned. During Exercise Trident, Winters explained, Lieutenant Rodriguez detected unauthorized transmissions from within the strike group. Classified tactical data was being sent to an external server using a sophisticated encryption protocol. Hayes's face had gone pale, but he maintained his composure. There must be some mistake. No mistake, Commander, Rodriguez said, activating a new display showing a complex signal analysis. The transmission signature is unmistakable. You used the Jupiter-Moon encryption protocol, a method so distinctive, we detected it a month ago during a similar transmission from the Naval Base San Diego dining facility. Understanding dawned on Thornton's face. The day of the incident, you weren't being insubordinate, you were tracking a spy. Rodriguez nodded once. I was triangulating the source when you interrupted. The signal strength increased by 300% precisely when you approached my position, suggesting someone was using your confrontation as a distraction. Hayes, Thornton turned to his aide, disbelief etched on his features. You've been my right hand for 3 years. Hayes said nothing, his eyes calculating, assessing his options. What I find most interesting, Admiral Winters continued, is where the data was being sent. Not directly to a foreign intelligence service, as one might expect, but first through a server connected to Senator Blackwood's office. This revelation hit Thornton like a physical blow. Blackwood, the same Blackwood who's been pushing for the funding reallocation? The very same, Rodriguez confirmed. After leaving the senator's server, the data was forwarded to an unidentified location in the South China Sea. Thornton's face had grown ashen. I've been pushing that funding proposal for months. Blackwood convinced me it was critical for maintaining naval superiority. You were being used, Admiral, Winters said, her voice softening slightly. Blackwood needed your credibility to push through the funding shift, which would have gutted our electronic warfare capabilities, just as our adversaries are developing exactly the type of attack Lieutenant Rodriguez demonstrated today. Hayes suddenly laughed a short, harsh sound. You still don't understand the full scope. This goes far beyond Blackwood or a funding shift. Then enlighten us, Commander, Winters said coldly. Hayes leaned forward. You think this is about stealing tactical data? That's just a bonus. The real operation is about strategic influence, shaping American naval doctrine to favor platforms and systems that are increasingly vulnerable to next-generation electronic warfare. Why defeat your enemy in battle when you can shape how they prepare for battle? Rodriguez studied Hayes with clinical detachment. You're only partially correct. The data you transmitted included more than tactical information. It contained the command authentication protocols for nuclear release procedures. This statement landed like a depth charge in the small room. Thornton physically recoiled. That's impossible, he whispered. Those protocols are compartmentalized. No single officer has access to the complete authentication chain. Correct, Rodriguez agreed, which is why the operation required someone with access to multiple command nodes over time. Someone like your aide who has accompanied you to every strategic command briefing for the past 3 years. Hayes's expression shifted then from careful neutrality to something colder, more calculated. You understand so little of what's coming. Today's demonstration was impressive, Lieutenant, but it's a firecracker compared to the capabilities being developed. The next war won't be fought with carriers and missiles. It will be fought in the electromagnetic spectrum and the human cognitive domain. And your precious Navy is a decade behind. That's where you're wrong, Rodriguez replied calmly. We're not behind, we just don't advertise our true capabilities. At that moment, the door opened again. Colonel Mitchell entered, accompanied by 2 more MPs. Commander Robert Hayes, Mitchell announced formally, you are hereby detained under suspicion of espionage, treason, and violation of classified information protocols. You will be transferred to a secure facility for further questioning. As the MPs moved to take Hayes into custody, the commander looked directly at Rodriguez, something like professional respect flickering across his face. Well played, Lieutenant. I underestimated you. A common mistake, Rodriguez replied simply. As Hayes was escorted from the room, Thornton sat in stunned silence, trying to process the implications of what he'd just learned. His trusted aide was a foreign agent. The funding initiative he'd championed would have critically weakened national security, and the officer he had publicly humiliated had just saved the Navy from a catastrophic intelligence breach. James, Admiral Winters said gently, this conversation isn't over, but we need to brief the CNO immediately. The implications go far beyond this strike group. Thornton nodded numbly. Of course. As Winters left to arrange the secure call to the Chief of Naval Operations, Thornton found himself alone with Rodriguez and Mitchell. The silence stretched between them, heavy with unspoken recriminations. Finally, Thornton spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. I've been a complete fool. Not a fool, Admiral, Mitchell replied. A naval officer trained for a different era. The threats have changed. I struck you, Thornton said, looking directly at Rodriguez. In front of hundreds of witnesses. I was so certain of my superiority. Rodriguez met his gaze evenly. The incident was logged and reported through appropriate channels. Yet no formal charges were filed, Thornton noted. Why? Mitchell answered. Timing. We needed to understand the full scope of the security breach before acting. A public disciplinary proceeding would have alerted Hayes and his handlers that we were onto them. So you waited, Thornton said with dawning understanding. You documented everything and waited for the perfect moment to spring the trap. Spectral documentation and systematic correction, Rodriguez confirmed. Standard operating procedure. Thornton nodded slowly, a new respect evident in his eyes. Lieutenant Rodriguez, Elena, I owe you a formal apology. My behavior was inexcusable, my judgment flawed, and my treatment of you reprehensible. Rodriguez considered him for a moment. Apology accepted, Admiral. The system has corrected itself. Before the conversation could continue, Admiral Winters returned. The CNO wants a full briefing in 1 hour. A secure transport is being arranged. Lieutenant Rodriguez will accompany us to Washington. Ma'am, Rodriguez acknowledged. What about Senator Blackwood? FBI is moving on his offices as we speak, Winters replied. This goes all the way to the highest levels. The machinery of national security had been set in motion. The implications would reverberate through the military establishment for years to come. As the officers prepared to depart, Thornton approached Rodriguez one last time. Lieutenant, there will be a formal inquiry into my conduct. I won't contest the findings. Rodriguez looked at him, something like compassion flickering in her eyes. Admiral, your experience and leadership are still valuable assets. The Navy doesn't need you to fall on your sword. It needs you to adapt. With that, she turned and left, leaving Thornton to contemplate a future very different from the one he had envisioned. 3 weeks later, Lieutenant Elena Rodriguez stood at attention in the Secretary of the Navy's ceremonial office at the Pentagon. The wood-paneled room was filled with senior naval leaders, intelligence officials, and a small group of congressional representatives. Notable by their absence were Senator Blackwood, who was now under federal investigation, and Commander Hayes, who remained in custody at a classified location. Lieutenant Rodriguez, the secretary began, your actions during Exercise Trident and the subsequent counterintelligence operation have uncovered one of the most significant security breaches in recent naval history. Your innovative approach to electronic warfare has fundamentally changed how we understand modern naval combat. He lifted a small box from his desk. It is my honor to promote you to the rank of Lieutenant Commander effective immediately. As the secretary pinned the new rank insignia to her collar, Rodriguez maintained her characteristic composure, though those who knew her well might have detected the slight lift at the corner of her mouth, her version of beaming pride. Thank you, Mr. Secretary, she said simply. Furthermore, the secretary continued, you are hereby appointed as the first director of the newly established Naval Cognitive Warfare Command. Your mission will be to develop the next generation of electronic warfare doctrine and countermeasures to ensure our continued maritime superiority. This announcement sent a ripple of murmurs through the assembled officers. It represented a significant shift in naval strategic thinking, an acknowledgement that warfare had evolved beyond kinetic weapons to the manipulation of information and perception. After the ceremony, Rodriguez found Colonel Mitchell waiting in the antechamber. His weathered face bore a rare, genuine smile. Congratulations, Commander, he said, emphasizing her new rank with evident pride. Quite a leap from the MIT student I recruited all those years ago. Thank you, sir, Rodriguez replied, but I couldn't have done it without your guidance. Mitchell waved this away. You had the talent. I just pointed you in the right direction. He gestured toward the window where the Potomac River gleamed in the distance. Walk with me. As they strolled along the Pentagon's corridors, Mitchell updated her on recent developments. Hayes is cooperating with interrogators. Limited cooperation, but enough to help us identify other potential security breaches. Blackwood is fighting the charges, of course, but the evidence trail is solid. Your documentation was impeccable. And Admiral Thornton, Rodriguez asked. Mitchell's expression grew thoughtful. That's an interesting case. There will be consequences for his conduct, of course, but something unexpected has happened. After the initial shock wore off, he's become one of the most vocal advocates for reforming our electronic warfare doctrine. He's been giving briefings to flag officers about the vulnerabilities you exposed. Rodriguez considered this. Adaptation rather than elimination. The system corrects itself. Exactly. Mitchell paused at a window overlooking the Pentagon courtyard. There's something else you should know. We've received intelligence suggesting foreign adversaries are developing capabilities similar to what you demonstrated during Trident. Your new command won't be theoretical. It's going to be on the front lines of the next evolution in warfare. I understand, sir. Mitchell studied her for a moment. You know, when I found you at MIT, what impressed me most wasn't your technical brilliance. It was your patience, your ability to see the long game. Most electronic warfare specialists want immediate results, the satisfaction of jamming an enemy system or breaking an encryption. You understood that sometimes the most effective strategy is to wait to observe, to let the target reveal its own vulnerabilities. I had a good teacher, Rodriguez replied. Mitchell smiled. We both did. The Russians taught me during the Cold War. I taught you, and now you'll teach the next generation. He sighed. Speaking of which, I've decided to officially retire, for real this time. Rodriguez looked at him sharply. Sir, I'm pushing 70, Elena. It's time. Besides, the Naval Cognitive Warfare Command needs someone with current technical expertise, not old Cold War stories. Your experience is invaluable, Colonel, and it will remain available to you, Mitchell assured her. I'm not disappearing. I'll be a civilian consultant, but the new command needs your vision, not mine. As they resumed walking, they passed a conference room where Admiral Thornton was conducting a briefing. Through the glass walls, they could see him gesturing at a display showing the same vulnerability Rodriguez had exploited during Exercise Trident. His audience of senior officers was paying rapt attention. Mitchell noticed Rodriguez observing the scene. Want to know something interesting? He requested to be assigned as your deputy at the new command. This actually caused Rodriguez to raise an eyebrow, a significant display of emotion by her standards. I declined the offer, Mitchell continued. Told him you needed someone with more current technical knowledge. But I did suggest he head up the training division, teaching senior officers about these new threats. He accepted immediately. Appropriate allocation of experience, Rodriguez noted. Indeed, Mitchell smiled. The man who struck you in public will now spend the remainder of his career teaching others about the lesson you taught him. I believe that's what they call poetic justice. They continued walking in companionable silence until reaching the Pentagon's river entrance where Mitchell's car was waiting. One last thing, Mitchell said, turning to face his protege. The new command will give you access to our most advanced research. Some of what you'll see goes beyond anything we've discussed. The boundary between electronic warfare and cognitive manipulation is blurring. Be careful, Elena. Technology without ethical constraints can lead us to dark places. Rodriguez nodded solemnly. I understand the responsibility, sir. Mitchell clasped her shoulder briefly, a rare physical gesture from the normally reserved colonel. I know you do. That's why you're the right person for this. As Mitchell departed, Rodriguez stood for a moment watching the river flow past. The promotion and new command were significant accomplishments, but her mind was already racing ahead, analyzing potential threats, developing countermeasures, envisioning the electronic battlefield of tomorrow. Her hand unconsciously touched her cheek where Thornton's ring had struck her. The mark had faded completely, but its impact remained a catalyst for change that would reshape naval warfare for a generation. 2 days later, Rodriguez walked into the converted warehouse in Maryland that would serve as the temporary headquarters for the Naval Cognitive Warfare Command. The facility was still being prepared with technicians installing equipment and security personnel establishing protocols. As she surveyed what would become the command center, a familiar voice called out behind her. Commander Rodriguez, a moment of your time. She turned to find Admiral Thornton standing at attention. His uniform was impeccable as always, but there was something different about his demeanor, a humility that hadn't been there before. Admiral, she acknowledged with a crisp nod, I wanted to speak with you privately before we begin the formal working relationship, Thornton said. What I did to you was unforgivable. I've submitted to a formal reprimand and accepted reduction in grade as consequence for my actions. That wasn't necessary, Admiral, Rodriguez replied. The incident has been resolved. Not to my satisfaction, Thornton insisted. I've spent my entire career upholding a code of conduct that I violated that day. My personal feelings about technological change never justified physical assault. He straightened his shoulders. I want you to know that I will serve this command with absolute professionalism and dedication. You've taught the Navy and me personally a lesson we desperately needed to learn. Rodriguez studied him for a moment. Admiral warfare evolves. The officers who adapt survive and contribute. Those who resist become obsolete. She paused. You've chosen to adapt. That demonstrates both wisdom and character. Thank you, Commander. Thornton hesitated, then continued. There's something else you should know. After my awakening, I began reviewing historical operations where electronic warfare played a decisive role. I found a classified after-action report from Operation Desert Storm. A young signals intelligence officer identified a vulnerability in Iraqi air defense systems that allowed our first-wave strikes to penetrate undetected. He met her gaze directly. That officer was Frank Mitchell. When I served with him briefly in the Gulf, he tried to convince me that electronic warfare was the future. I dismissed him then, just as I dismissed you 30 years later. I failed to learn from history. Rodriguez's expression remained neutral, but something flickered in her eyes, recognition of the connected threads that had led to this moment. History doesn't repeat, Admiral, but it does rhyme, she said. Colonel Mitchell identified the same potential in you that he saw in me, the capacity to adapt and grow. That's why he recommended you for the training division. Thornton looked surprised. Mitchell recommended me. I assumed it was a consolation assignment. The colonel doesn't believe in consolation assignments, Rodriguez replied. He believes in optimal resource allocation. Your experience properly redirected remains valuable. Before Thornton could respond, Senior Chief Lawson approached, tablet in hand. Commander, we've detected something interesting, Lawson reported, nodding respectfully to Thornton before continuing. That signal pattern with the Jupiter moon encryption, it's back but modified. Someone's adapted it to avoid our previous detection methods. Rodriguez's expression sharpened with interest. Hayes is in custody. Someone else must be using the protocol. It gets better, Lawson continued. We've traced it to a diplomatic facility in Virginia. Same transmission pattern, new origin point. Thornton listened with growing understanding. The network is larger than Hayes and Blackwood. Much larger, Rodriguez confirmed. This was never about a single breach or funding shift. It's about ongoing intelligence penetration of our most sensitive capabilities. She turned to Thornton. Admiral, it appears your first assignment with the new command has found you. What do you need from me? Thornton asked without hesitation. Your experience with naval intelligence protocols and your connections throughout the flag officer community, Rodriguez replied. We need to identify every point of contact Hayes and Blackwood had with senior leadership. We're looking for evidence of influence operations targeting our strategic doctrine. Thornton nodded, his expression hardening with resolve. I'll begin immediately. As he departed to start the investigation, Lawson turned to Rodriguez. You trust him. After what he did. Trust is operational, not personal, Rodriguez replied. His capabilities are relevant to the mission. His past behavior has been corrected. Lawson shook his head with a smile. Cold as ice, Commander. Mitchell trained you well. He did, Rodriguez acknowledged. And now we continue that work. She turned back to the command center, watching as the future of naval warfare took shape around her. The electronic battlefield was evolving rapidly. New threats were emerging daily. Foreign adversaries were developing capabilities that could render traditional military assets obsolete. But they would face an opponent they hadn't anticipated, a quiet, methodical officer who understood that patience was the ultimate weapon, that systems corrected themselves when presented with irrefutable evidence, and that the most devastating strikes were the ones the target never saw coming. 6 months later, Rodriguez stood on the observation deck of the USS Enterprise, the Navy's newest aircraft carrier, watching flight operations with the detached interest of someone evaluating a complex system. F-35 fighters launched and recovered with clockwork precision, their integrated sensor suites communicating continuously with the carrier's combat systems. Admiral Winters joined her at the railing. Impressive, isn't it? The culmination of 70 years of carrier aviation evolution. It's an extraordinary platform, Rodriguez agreed, and potentially vulnerable to the same class of attacks we demonstrated during Trident. That's why we're here, Winters reminded her. The upgrades your command developed are being implemented fleet-wide. In the months since the establishment of the Naval Cognitive Warfare Command, Rodriguez and her team had developed a revolutionary approach to electronic security, a system that incorporated both technological safeguards and human judgment filters. The architecture was designed not just to resist electronic attack, but to identify and isolate cognitive warfare attempts that targeted perception rather than systems. The Hayes-Blackwood network has been completely dismantled, Winters continued. 27 individuals charged, including 3 flag officers and a Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense. It's the most significant counterintelligence success in decades. Rodriguez nodded. Thornton's assistance was instrumental. His knowledge of informal flag officer networks helped identify meetings and contacts that wouldn't appear in official records. He's found his redemption, Winters observed. The training program he's developed has become mandatory for all command track officers. The man who once mocked electronic warfare has become its most passionate advocate. Adaptation is the essential characteristic of effective warfare, Rodriguez replied. As they watched the flight operations continue, Winters studied the younger officer's profile. The Secretary has approved your proposal for the forward electronic countermeasures deployment. You'll have operational command of the first unit. Congratulations, Captain Rodriguez. This promotion, her second in 6 months, was unprecedented, but reflected the Navy's new prioritization of electronic warfare capabilities. Thank you, Admiral, Rodriguez replied, the slight lift at the corner of her mouth making its brief appearance. There's more, Winters continued. The unit will deploy aboard the guided missile destroyer USS Mitchell. Rodriguez turned to her, genuine surprise evident in her expression. They're naming a destroyer after the colonel. Winters smiled. The commissioning ceremony is next month. He's embarrassed about it, of course, but secretly pleased. The Navy finally recognized what you knew all along, that his quiet work during the Cold War and after laid the foundation for our current capabilities. Rodriguez turned back to the flight deck, watching the choreographed precision of launch and recovery operations. In her mind's eye, she could see the electromagnetic signals flowing between aircraft and ship, the radar beams scanning the horizon, the communications links connecting this vessel to others in the fleet. A vast, invisible ocean of data and energy that most people, even most naval officers, never truly perceived. That invisible domain was where the next war would be fought. Not with missiles and bombs, though those would still play their part, but with algorithms and perception management, with cognitive infiltration and systemic manipulation. We're still behind where we need to be, Rodriguez said quietly. What we've developed is just the beginning. I know, Winters acknowledged. That's why the Mitchell will be equipped with your experimental shadow spectrum system. You'll have the most advanced electronic warfare suite ever deployed at sea. Rodriguez nodded, already envisioning how she would organize the deployment. The invisible battlefield was constantly shifting, evolving, presenting new challenges and vulnerabilities. There would be no decisive victory, no surrender ceremony, no peace treaty, only the continuous silent contest of measure and countermeasure, action and reaction, perception and reality. But she was ready. Mitchell had taught her patience and strategic thinking. Thornton had inadvertently provided the catalyst for institutional change. Hayes and his network had revealed the true scope of the threat. All had contributed to creating this moment, this opportunity to reshape naval warfare for the challenges ahead. As the sun set over the carrier's flight deck, casting long shadows across the massive vessel, Rodriguez felt the weight of responsibility settle firmly on her shoulders. The Navy was evolving, adapting to a new era of warfare where electronic dominance would determine victory or defeat long before the first shot was fired. And it had all begun with a single moment in a base dining facility, a moment when an admiral's hand had struck her cheek, setting in motion events that would transform the world's most powerful navy. The market faded long ago. The lesson would endure forever.